Well, I'm back again for an installment of Calvin's sermon on valuing God's church and the freedom to worship Him. We know what the church is for. Our confession of faith says it's for the going out and the gathering of people through the preaching of the gospel, that they might come into the household of faith and be raised up in the nurture and admonition of the Lord. So we're to be evangelistic, and we're to be teaching, training, discipling. That's what the church is about, primarily. From there comes the bearing one another's burdens, encouraging one another, etc. Then Calvin says we should take careful note of who it is that speaks these words. This is one who says that his greatest pleasure is to join the congregation of God's people, so that as he declares his faith, he may be built up by the word of salvation which is there proclaimed, and by the sacraments. So we value God's church, and we long to be there in worship because we want to grow in our faith. And then Calvin says this: well then, those possessing most perfections are much more conscious of what they lack than those who have nothing at all. Those who have nothing at all can only focus on the things right before them that they don't have. But the ones who have much, they're very conscious of the details of what they lack. Is David handsomely endowed with angelic qualities? Now, the rhetorical question there is to be answered in the yes, he is. And this is not that he was an angel or that he was looking forward to dying and getting wings. You know, there are people who believe that when a human being dies, they go to heaven and get wings, like Clarence. And it's December. Some network or two or three will show the old black and white edition of Jimmy Stewart in It's a Wonderful Life, and perhaps the Ted Turner colorized version of It's a Wonderful Life. And you've got Clarence, the angel who's down here working, trying to get his wings. And so he's trying to help, the Jimmy Stewart character, and hopefully that'll earn him some wings. And at the end, of course, they hear the little ding-ling-ling, and oh, somebody got their wings. And Jimmy Stewart says, "Attaboy, Clarence." Well, that's all fictitious. That's not the way it is. We are distinct from angels, and we shall ever be that. We are humans. They're angels. They're creatures of God for their purposes. We are image bearers of God for our purpose in His economy. So, was David handsomely endowed with angelic qualities or heavenly qualities? It's so that he might better understand his need for the preaching of the law, for the sacraments, and for similar observances which will kindle his devotion. So those who are endowed with heavenly qualities, they know what they need, and they go for it. So the Christian knows what he needs, what she needs, and they're there at church, worshiping God, receiving from Him through the means of grace. By contrast, those bragging wretches who today pay no heed to all such things quite plainly demonstrate that they have not a drop of Christian faith in them. You know people like that. They may even say they're Christians, but they don't need the church. People at the church are wrong. People at the church are hypocrites. They can read the Bible on their own. They don't need that preacher. They don't need those teachers. And the Lord's Supper is just grape and bread, grape juice or wine and bread, and I can do that here at home. They plainly demonstrate that they have not a drop of Christian faith in them. Folks, listen, it's time we quit patronizing our friends who claim to be Christians but have nothing to do with the Christian faith. And at the very center, the epicenter of the Christian faith is God's church. Calvin continues, I'm referring to those desk-bound intellectuals who live under papal rule. We're quite right, they say, not to be Christians if it means trotting off to Geneva to have sermons drummed into our ears and to follow the rites which are practiced there. Cannot we read and pray to God by ourselves? Must we attend church to receive instruction since everyone has the Scripture in his own house? Well, we still hear those same sorts of excuses, don't we? My answer to this is that we lay no obligation on anyone to move from the place where they are. In fact, when someone is living purely and serving God properly in the midst of popish oppression, I esteem him, relatively speaking, 100 times more than I do us who live in peace and freedom. Okay, I've got to explain a little bit there. Living under papal rule was under the Roman Catholic Church. And he's saying, look, if you can worship God, if you can coalesce with a group of believers and have a church in a Roman Catholic country, we might say today in an Islamic country, okay, or in a secular country, a secular state like France, very much opposed to Christianity, no laws really to help or to do good for the church. We're quickly becoming like that, aren't we? He says, now you don't have to move to this city or that city to be a Christian and be involved in church. If there's a good church there where you live, that's where you should be. Here, however, two issues are involved. First, whether those who, knowing their weakness, are not right to seek in a Christian church the same kind of confirmation that David in his time sought in the Jerusalem temple. And second, whether everyone in general, including those who are forced to stay where they are, should not greatly sigh as they see themselves deprived of the normal means by which they might be led to God. If the animals who possess neither mind nor reason cry out for food, should not those who call themselves God's children worry about what is meant to nourish and maintain their faith? Not content to trample underfoot not content to trample underfoot such precious gifts of God, the intellectuals deride those who flee to foreign lands where these gifts may be sought and enjoyed. As for their arrogance, which leads them to think that sermons, public prayers, and the sacraments are more or less irrelevant, that is ample grounds for excommunicating them and banishing them from God's church. Let's transport that into our own context. If there's someone you know who says, I'm a Christian and I'm even a member of X church, but I don't need the sermons, I don't need the public prayers of the saints, I don't need the Lord's Supper, I don't need the communion of saints, that kind of person is subject to excommunication from the church. Why? Because they're violating the very vows that God has called them to, of supporting the worship and the work of the church to the best of their ability. That this is so clear from Paul, who never regards the ministry decreed by Christ for the church as applying only to the ignorant and untutored. It's something intended without exception for everyone who names the name of Christ. We read, therefore, that God ordained apostles, pastors, and teachers for the equipping of the saints and for the building of Christ's body until we all, underscore that little word, all, attain the unity of faith, the mature man, and the measure of Christ's complete stature. Let us note that Paul nowhere says that God left Scripture for individuals to read solely by themselves. Rather, he set up a structure in which certain people should teach and which included everything else as a kind of offshoot. So while everyone may read in private, there's nothing to stop them hearing in public. And to whom are Paul's words addressed? To both great and small, without distinction. Does he mean this to last for only a day? No, not at all. This is the course he means us to follow till the day we die, for that is when we attain full maturity. Those who cannot bring themselves to grow in faith and in every virtue through the church's normal ministry are well on the way to cutting themselves off from the fellowship of God's children. Let them quibble all they like. Paul's statement is very clear. No one belongs to Christ's body or can be regarded as a member unless he obeys this general rule. So, brethren, let us humble ourselves and not tempt God by thinking that we can fly without wings. Calvin, from the volume entitled Faith Unfeigned, on valuing God's church and the freedom to worship him. Well, we'll move on with the next little section of Calvin's wonderful and convicting sermon next time. Until then, God bless.